Hello again, welcome back to Glasgow. Now, 70 leading climate scientists have called on the UK to take bold political action on fossil fuels and rule out new oil and gas investment to ensure the Glasgow Climate Conference here is a success. Well, one of them, who's joining us now, is Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor of Atmospheric Science at Pennsylvania State University, also author of The New Climate War. Great to see you again. Thanks very much for being with us. Before we speak about some of your many areas of interest, just wanted to get your reaction to the breaking news from Glasgow about India unable to commit to net zero by 2050, instead saying 2070. There's quite a lot of disappointment here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be with you. And, we have to see this through the lens of international diplomacy. One of the critical developments, one of the critical efforts here at COP26 is the effort for the industrial world, for the world's major industrial economies to come up with sufficient support, by some estimates, about $100 billion a year in funding and financing for developing countries so that they can accelerate their transition away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. We don't want them to develop the fossil fuel infrastructure that we developed in the West. We can't afford for them to go down that path. And so we need to provide them incentives so that it makes sense, so that it's economically beneficial for them to leapfrog past the fossil fuel stage directly towards renewable and clean energy. And I think what we're seeing right now is sort of some of the haggling that is part of the process of gaining that support.
Do you think we could see a situation then where over the next 2 weeks, perhaps they're able to reduce that target because people are making pledges to help them financially? Because after all, let's not forget, India gets 80% of its energy, I think, from coal.
Yeah, absolutely. It is certainly my hope that we will see more encouraging language from them by the time these negotiations are over in a little less than 2 weeks. And, let's be clear, we have to collectively reduce carbon emissions by about 50% over the next decade to avert a catastrophic 1.5 degrees Celsius warming of the planet. That's going to come through a combination of many of us reducing those carbon emissions even faster. Those of us who have had the luxury of 1 or 2 centuries of access to cheap, dirty fossil fuel energy, it is incumbent upon us to ramp down our carbon emissions even faster, with the hope that we can bring the developing world to peak their carbon emissions within the next decade and begin to bring those down as well.
Am I reading between the lines that you're pointing the finger at the UK as much as anyone else? Because you have been very critical, haven't you, in the past about the UK when it comes to oil and gas contracts and new coal fields?
Well, yeah, and here in the United States, we haven't done as much as we could either, although we do have renewed leadership under the Biden administration. So there's enough blame to go around here. Boris Johnson is saying the right things. He's making the right commitments. He's certainly speaking the language of concern when it comes to the climate crisis. But at the same time, it's very difficult to claim that you're making the necessary commitments when you're still providing support for new fossil fuel infrastructure, new oil and gas pipelines domestically. The International Energy Agency, which by no means is a cheerleader for renewable energy. They've been quite conservative when it comes to the renewable energy transition. Even they have said that there can be no new fossil fuel infrastructure now if we are to meet those targets that we're talking about.
You mentioned your own country. You're in Pennsylvania. President Biden here, of course, a new administration, a very different view to the climate change crisis. But, of course, he's being stymied, isn't he, in Congress?
It's a bit frustrating, frankly, for many of us. The Biden administration has done just about everything it can from the executive side of things. But we need legislation that will codify their efforts and will allow them to make good on their commitments, including the commitment to lower carbon emissions by 50% within the decade. And right now, the legislation that would allow us to do that, which would codify those commitments, is stuck in an intransigent Congress where there are 50 Republicans and 2 Democrats that currently stand in the way. So it's mostly Republican opposition, but there are a couple Democrats, including a coal state Democrat, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, that are currently also standing in the way of this legislation. We need them to make sure that they are on the right side of history and that they do side with the other Democrats and pass this legislation before it's too late. We have to make this transition now. We need these commitments now. If we kick the can another few years down the road, it's going to be very difficult for us to keep those carbon emissions low enough to avert catastrophic warming of the planet.
Yeah, it's a message that is echoing around the conference hall here in Glasgow. Michael Mann, always good to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.